Hi guys, welcome to Catway. So we will be discussing one RC in this, and then I'll let you know how to solve an RC, how to approach an RC, because all of you must have gotten somewhere stuck during solving the RCs, right? So let's see. Cross the boundaries of the former Yugoslavia, and you face a few hassles. Heading from Slovenia to Croatia, you encounter the southern border, which separates the European Union's passport free area from those EU countries which are not members of it. Cross from Croatia into Serbia or Bosnia, etc., and you leave the EU entirely. Here you find custom checks and passport controls. So basically, the crux of this paragraph is hurdles when you try to cross the border, right? All right, let's see. The one thing that you might have not have even noticed is a difference in language. In Slovenia, the tourist might pick X, Dober and Dan, welcome, hello, etc., etc., right? Not necessary. In Croatia, these are all examples of something that is the language barrier that we might face. So what I can say from here is not everything is the same by any means, but Croatians and Slovenes can largely understand each other's language. So basically, we are talking about two countries, Croatia and Slovenia, and they can understand each other's language. Then why are they considered two distinct languages at all? So the author is asking when they are able to understand each other's language, so why is there XYZ? Why is there the language that are considered distinct? Now, as soon as I got this question, in the next paragraph, what I can feel in the next paragraph, the author might be trying to answer the question of this. Let's see. So, in the next paragraph, the author talks about Yugoslavia, cobbled together from territories mostly populated with speakers of southern Slavic tongues, was dominated by a language called Serbo-Croatian. Serbians wrote it with the Cyrillic alphabet, and Croats, Muslims, and X preferred the Latin one. So this is showing the language difference, right? The language difference, distinction in language that was talked in paragraph second. We can see the author is focusing on what exactly the difference in paragraph 3. But a few minor dialectal differences aside, they all clearly spoke the same language. Its varieties closer even than Slovenian and Croatian art. So it is talking about some other countries and then it is comparing it with Slovenia as well as Croatia. So, but when Yugoslavia broke up and republics went to war, not only the state but the language of Serbo-Croatian was dismantled. Nationalists in the successor republics insist today that they speak Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian, and Montenegrin. Last year, liberal intellectuals gathered in Sarajevo to affirm that Serbs, Croats, etc., etc., speak a single polycentric language like English. Nationalists hold. So that means what? The focus is on to cut the distinctions that are there in terms of language, and they are trying to create one language that polycentric in nature that can be said by Serbia, Croatia, Montenegrins, and Bosniaks as well, right? So till here, what we have studied, the author is trying to showcase us the distinction. वो distinction दिखा रहा है कि हाँ ये सारी दिक्कतें हैं, है ना, ये सारे लैंग्वेज में distinctions है. And then he is asking the question कि but अगर समझ जाते हैं तो why is there the distinction? And then he is trying to answer कि there are many countries who are facing the same things, same challenges, and that's why to curb those challenges, उन challenges को कम करने के लिए they are trying to come up with a solution, and that solution is a polycentric language, right? Let's see. Max van Rits, a linguist, made famous the Weimar remark that a language is a dialect with an army and a navy. Okay, so it's a remark. The usual criterion for what is a separate language and not a mere dialect is that speakers of two languages should find it difficult or impossible to understand each other. So now he's coming up with some segregation. If you want to consider something as a language, it should be difficult for another country's citizens to speak that language. right? It's not only about speaking, it's also about understanding the language. But factors that have nothing to do with language often supersede the linguistic ones. So the author has asked, why is there such a barrier? And then he is coming up with the answer that some of the factors that are not linguistic supersedes these problems that they have right now, right? Those who try to tally up the world's language are either lumpers who treat mutually comprehensible tongues as single language, and splitters who focus on the difference. So there are two types of people. One is lumper, one is splitter. A lumper would say that Macedonian is really Bulgarian. Macedonian splitters angrily retort that this is an attempt to obliterate their identity, right? So obviously lumper को सारे languages एक जैसे लगते हैं, whereas Macedonians see they are the splitters, so they feel that there are some differences, and if someone is saying that both are same, that means it's not a good gesture towards their language, and it's an obliterate to the identity of theirs. Lumper splitter controversy can be found around the world. Swedes, Danes, and Norwegians can understand each other pretty well too, but few say that they simply speak Scandinavian. So Scandinavian is what? The language that might be spoken by Swedes, Danes, and Norwegians cumulatively, right? While lines on the map are influential, other loyalties play a role too. Lumpers once recognized a language called Hindustani. Its disparate speakers have no trouble conversing, but a splitter would point to the two different writing system of Hindi and Urdu, as well as communal preference. Muslim speaks Urdu, Hindus Hindi, and say they are two languages. So now what happened? Lampa said that there is one language, that is Hindustani, in which people can easily communicate. Then splitters came into the picture. They said, "Aisa nahi hai. There are Urdu, there are Hindi, and Hindu people speaks Hindi, Muslim people speaks Urdu, right? Urdu is a language of India as well as Pakistan. The boundary is less territorial than religious, with the writing system of visible marker. Urdu's Arabic script connects it to Islam. Hindi's Devanagari links it to Sanskrit and Hinduism. So this is the distinction that is being created between Hindi and Urdu. In other words, the messy facts of the real world complicate the simple narrative some see as necessary for community building. Nationalists don't like to talk about the awful things their forebears did. They tend to assume that their country's most expansive borders are the natural ones. Though these inevitably overlap with their neighbors, border claims languages are no different. A phrase beloved of some journalists is even truer of nationalists. Never let the facts get in the way of a good story. So when you want to do something good, you shouldn't have that barrier in your mind. So that's the conclusion that the author wants to convey from here, right? Let's see. So if I'll be asking about what are the theories, so theory is all about this. RC is all about what is a language. There are communication barriers. Lumpers होते हैं, splitters होते हैं, communication barrier को how we can eliminate that out. All these things are there, right? And if you are seeing a bigger picture, there shouldn't be any communication barrier. That's the rationale of the author, right? So understood. Now let's move to the RC question 1. The author's key contention in this passage is, so what's his key contention, right? What he wants to intend to speak. So let's see. The reason behind considering some dialects as languages is more political and cultural than linguistic. Okay. So the reason behind considering some dialects as language is more political and cultural than linguistic. But nationalists ignore this fact. Now, see, what I feel is there is some misrepresentation of the facts. The fact according to the sentence, right? What does that mean? That means that the reasons behind considering some dialects as language is political, that we have read, right? Separate language and not a mere dialect is that speakers of two languages should find it difficult or impossible to understand. So that's a political motive, and it has nothing to do with language often supersede the linguistic ones, right? So that means what? This option has a misrepresentation. Why? Because the facts the author says, like the nationalists ignore, है ना? He says it in a different connotation, right? That इसका linguistic problem से कोई लेना देना है ही नहीं, है ना? And that idea in itself is an explicit one that is not dependent on it, anything else. Whereas it is trying to create a dependable idea, right? But nationalists ignore this fact, right? So that means what? It's not explicitly given, right? Hence, we will not keep this, we will keep this as an option, but somewhere we know that this might not be my answer. Let's see. Despite speakers of some dialects comprehending each other, those dialects are considered separate languages, right? ये दिया हुआ है कि in the case of Slovenia, right? As well as in the case of what? Croatia, है ना? Slovenia was dominated by a language, etc., etc. Croatia. So the two languages are what? One is Slovenia and another is Croatia. Okay? Those dialects are considered separate language, especially by nationalists, for reasons that supersede linguistic ones, directly given from the passage. So when we have direct, we have things that are mentioned directly in the passage, we will obviously keep this as an option, right? C says dialects, despite their similarities, existing their differences, end up being considered languages when supported by powerful lobbying groups. Now, when I'm talking about these powerful lobbying groups, right? First, we have to count on the number of similarities that's there and how many differences are there, right? But they have not talked about the differences here. है ना? Along with that, powerful lobbying group is an extreme explainer. When I am saying, let's see that the lead, it has nothing to do with language, often supersede the linguistic ones. That doesn't mean that it is affected by the powerful lobbying group, right? That will be an extreme statement that we'll be making. Hence, C will be eliminated. While Lumpos continue to argue that dialects are not separate languages, all right, but just polycentric. Splitters, especially nationalists, insist on separate language as a symbol of identity. So we have studied that what the dialects are not separate languages, but comprise part of a polycentric language, right? But what is given here are not separate languages. It's true. Till here it's true. Along with that, they have told what splitters, especially nationalists, insist on something that is separate language as a symbol of identity. So when we are comparing the splitters, we are trying to consider splitters as a whole, right? But we know that all splitters don't insist on separate languages. For the just for the sake of identity, we are not talking about all the splitters. It has been said that who also languages are either lumpers who treat mutually comprehensive language, and then there are splitters who focus on the differences, right? So we are not talking about all the splitters, right? So between option, also option D will be eliminated, है ना? सिंपल है एक लाइन में कि लंपर्स कंटिन्यू दैट टू आर्ग्यू दैट डायलॉग्स आर नॉट सेपरेट लैंग्वेज, यहां तक ठीक है, बट जस्ट पॉलीसेंट्रिक, राइट? तो ये व्हाट पॉलीसेंट्रिक वाली चीज कहां पे आई है, ये देखो पॉलीसेंट्रिक वाली चीज यहीं कहीं आई हुई थी, राइट? कि इट्स नॉट समथिंग दैट दे आर ट्राइंग टू गेट एन आइडिया ऑफ व्हाट can be consisted in polycentric language so that it can be easier for all to read and understand, right? So they are not separate language but just polycentric, but we cannot say that they are polycentric, simple, right? अब आते हैं A और B में. A says the reason behind considering some dialects as language is more political and cultural than linguist, but nationalists ignore this fact, right? So nationalists are not ignoring this fact. Nationalists are saying that we have to create that out. We have to do, this is not something that can be ignored easily, right? So nationalists' main focus are on this fact, and that's why option A will be eliminated. So option B is your answer, right? Let's move to the next question. Which of the following can be inferred from the last sentence of the passage? A phrase of a good story, right? So when I'm talking about a phrase of a good story, let's see the last passage. What does it say? In other words, the messy fact of the real world complicate the simple narratives. Some see as necessary for community building. Nationalists don't like to talk about the awful things their forebears did. They tend to assume that their country's most expensive borders are the natural ones. Though these inevitably overlap with their neighbors' borders claim, languages are no different. Right? So this is being told in the last paragraph. So now see, when I am talking about this paragraph, what do we understand? As soon as we saw that there is a phrase that is beloved of some journalists, है ना? So, and it is saying that it is even truer of nationalists that they never let the facts get in the way of a good story. At that point of time, we have to understand the essence of the sentence. The author here is not justifying for journalists, right? Whereas in the option, it is given that journalists do not misinterpret facts as much as nationalists do. So he's not trying to get a comparison between the journalists as well as nationalists, right? And along with that, they are not misinterpreting. So that's why this option is incorrect. Neither journalists nor nationalists care as much for the story as they do for the facts. Now, see, when I am saying that something is focusing on something extra and on another thing, the focus is not that much, right? But don't you think it is contradicting the idea that is mentioned in the passage, right? What's that idea that's given in the passage that journalists and nationalists care more for the story in comparison to what fact? In comparison to facts, right? So this might be an option because that is directly stated. C says narratives often supersede facts in journalism and more so in information, right? So see in the last paragraph what is said, these are the things that we have spoken. So from this what we can narrate, we can narrate that it is more important than facts, right? Because we know that facts shouldn't get in the way of a good story. And the same thing is true for nationalists too, right? So that's why this might be the answer. ठीक है? Because narratives often supersede facts in journalism. यहाँ तक सही है और वही चीज नेशनलिज्म में हो रहा है, ये भी सही है. The narratives of good stories are rarely based on immaculate facts. No, we are not trying to see whether the facts on which the narratives are based on are immaculate or not, right? So this will be eliminated. So out of B, C, and D, B, C, and B and C, we have to check which fits more. So when I'm talking about B, so it is contradicting the essence of the paragraph because journalists and nationalists came more for the story. So that's why when I read this, nor nationalists care as much for the story, it's wrong because they have also cared for the story as well, right? So that's why option A is eliminated, B is eliminated, D is eliminated, so C is the answer, right? Let's move to the next question. So which of the following can be inferred from the last sentence? And what's that last sentence? A phrase of a good story, right? This we discussed, haven't? This we discussed. So then question is all of the following are true except, haven't? So when I am talking about this, all of the following are true except. Now I'll have to check for the options. Splitters would consider the language of Swedes, etc. separate, whereas lumpers would call it Scandinavian, right? So they are considering it as separate, but lumpers are not considering it as Scandinavian. So that's why this option is closed for me. Splitters would say that Hindi and Urdu are separate languages, whereas lumpers would disagree, right? So splitters are saying that they are separate languages, but lumpers will not agree to this fact. So what we are considering here when I am talking about the lumper and when we are talking about the splitter, just keep in mind, right, that from what we have read here, lumpers once recognized the language. Here we had read, right? Lumpers recognized one language, Hindi, right? Its disparate speakers have no trouble conversing. But a splitter would point to the two different writing systems of Hindi and Urdu as well, right? As well as communal preferences, right? So from this, what we can understand? From this, we can understand that option B is implying to a difference, right? We are trying to seek for the difference that's given, and hence option B will not be my answer, right? Why? Because it is not talking about that difference. Right? Splitters would term Croatian and Slovenian language as separate language, whereas lumpers would call them versions of a polycentric language, right? So we cannot say that if they are speaking one common language, that common language will be polycentric. So it has only been stated, these are just the speculations. On the basis of this, he is saying that it is a polycentric language, whereas it is not. And D says splitters are more likely to be nationalists, whereas lumpers are more likely to be liberal intellectuals. Now, what do we mean by liberal intellectuals? इसका मतलब क्या होता है? Right? So liberal intellectuals और इसका passage में कहाँ पे use है? So we have seen, we remember that liberal intellectuals, what it was said about them? Liberal, if I am talking about the liberal intellectuals, they had argued that in the passage when I am talking about, they have argued that nationalists have argued the same way as the splitters have done, right? And they have insisted that the language are all separate and stand for an identity, right? So they are fighting for the identity at the end. However, let's say what we can infer from this, that reverse cannot be implied. And if reverse is not implied, we cannot say that lumpers are liberal intellectuals and splitters are nationalists, right? So if I don't have anything to speak about this, then what will I say, right? Splitters are more likely to be nationalists, whereas lumpers are more likely to be liberal intellectuals. So that's given, that splitters see split each and everything, and that's why they are arising the demand of a different nation or something, whereas lumpers को लगता है कि all are good, है ना? So that's why they are liberal intellectuals. That's given in the passage, hence the option answer will be D, right? Let's move to the next question. Next question says, which of the following answers to the author's question would most resonate with the author's opinion? So I am trying to talk about what? I am trying to talk about the author's opinion, right? So when I am talking about author's opinion, let's go to the options. Serbians use the Cyrillic alphabet, whereas Croats prefer the Latin ones. So let's see Serbians, what we are trying to, Serbians, etc., spoke a polycentric language. Okay. So it says, A is saying that Serbia, right? Serbia use the Cyrillic alphabet, whereas Croats prefer the Latin ones, right? So if I am reading this out, the reason why they are considered separate language has not gotten anything, right, in support of this or in support of the alphabet. So we can understand that Serbians wrote it in Cyrillic alphabets, whereas Croats, Muslims, and Montenegrins preferred the Latin ones. right? So that's why if I'm talking about this Cyrillic alphabets, है ना? So one second, guys. One second. So if I am talking about keyword most resonate, so Serbians use the Cyrillic alphabet. That's for sure. And when Serbians are using the Cyrillic alphabet, whereas Croats are preferring the Latin ones, right? This is given to the authors would most resonate with the author's opinion. So we have to resonate it with the author's opinion, whereas it is just one sentence that has been put in here, right? There are a few minor dialectal differences in the Serbo-Croatian language. So when I am talking about the Serbo-Croatian language, obviously there are a few minor dialectal differences, but a few minor, if I am talking about the few minor dialectal differences, apart from that, if you leave them aside, are there any other difference that I am talking about? No. And hence I can say that the few minor dialectal difference could be pushed aside if we want to prosper the language, right? And it will not create much chaos. Why? Just because all of them speak the same language. Now see, what she says is, it is a consequence of the post-war nationalism in the successor republics of erstwhile Yugoslavia. So from these lines, right, what we can infer that Yugoslovakia broke up and the republics went to war, right? All right, sorted hai yahan pe. But along with that, we have to also keep in mind that not only the state but the language of Serbo-Croatian War was dismantled. Right? We had read that out that they dismantled the language. है ना? They dismantled the language. So from here, I can say if I am talking about the dismantling of language, so what is given here? It's a consequence. There are few minor. This we have discussed. It won't be the answer. It is a consequence of the post-war nationalism in the successor republic of erstwhile Yugoslavia. So it is clearly given that post-war, these are the scenarios that had happened. That's why I'll keep this as an option. And D says the real regions aren't as political as they are linguistic. So when I'm reading this out, this tends to suggest that what the region dialects are considered as separate language has got more to do with linguistic, right? And it is mentioning just the reverse of that. So now we are left with two options. One is option A and one is option C. Read the lines in option A very carefully. Serbians use the Cyrillic alphabet, whereas Croats prefer the Latin ones. So when I am talking about Cyrillic alphabets and Croatians using the Latin ones, so it can be understood from the portion that we had seen that Serbians wrote it with Cyrillic. ये पक्की बात है, Serbians wrote it with Cyrillic, and Croats, Muslim and Montenegrins, Montenegrins obviously, yeah. So Montenegrins, है ना? They prefer the Latin one. But along with that, have we also discussed that there are few minor dialectal differences that are there and they all clearly spoke the same language, right? So if they are speaking the same language, we cannot segregate it on the basis of that, and hence option A will be eliminated, right? So C is the answer, right, guys? All right. Thank you for attending the session, guys. With this, we come to the end of this discussion. We'll meet tomorrow with the RC set and video solution.